Hi, I'm Carol Queen, and I'm the curator of the Antique Vibrator Museum at Good Vibrations Polk Street store in San Francisco, California. And Good Vibrations has been around since 1977, and our founder, Joni Blank, among many other things, was a collector of antique vibrators. It seemed a really interesting thing to do to put them in the store, as well as the new vibrators that she was selling, partly because most people in those days, and many people now, don't know that the vibrator has a history that goes far back from, the 70s and 60s, which is when most people began to see ads for them in magazines. So I'm going to invite you into the museum and tell you a little bit about that history. Right here we're standing in front of some of the oldest vibrators in the Good Vibrations collection, and as you can see, some of them are not even electric, some of them are hand crank. And these have such a fascinating history. You see a picture of somebody who might be a doctor using it on a woman in Victorian times here. And in fact, that is how vibrators were developed, and the reason for them being developed was that in the old days, women often had a disease, they called it a disease, called hysteria. And hysteria was a lot of different symptoms. There was no longer such a disease. It got voted out of the medical books in 1952 or so. Part of the reason of that strange occurrence happening, because mostly diseases don't get voted out of existence, was that vibrators proved to be an extremely good treatment for hysteria, all the way back to the Greek physician Galen, and possibly longer back in history than that. Doctors knew that women had this condition. They called it hysteria, which is associated with the Greek word for womb or uterus, and they thought that the woman's womb was coming detached and wandering around her body, causing mayhem. And it would affect her mood, it would affect her health, it would affect all kinds of things. Probably a key part of what this condition hysteria was social ignorance then and now about female sexuality and women not having what they needed sexually to be healthy people. So the condition hysteria, it turned out, could be treated with hand manipulation of the vulva. And hand manipulation of the vulva would, by a doctor or somebody that the doctor assigned, like a midwife or a nurse, could result in hysterical paroxysms of relief. I call it an orgasm when that happens to me. I don't know about you, but this seemed to take the edge off the hysteria symptoms. And it was said, we know that it was associated somehow with sexuality, because it was said that single women and widows were way more likely to get this condition than married women. Not that all married women had a fabulous sex life, but there's a lot we don't know about the inner workings of this condition and why so many people believed that they had it or showed symptoms of it. But it turns out that the hand manipulation took too long. When they developed the vibrator in the 1880s, that was efficient, and doctors were able much more quickly to treat the women, because vibrators are a very efficient way of having either hysterical paroxysms or orgasms. And these are some of the very early 20th century vibrators. These are all now vibrators that people could have gotten in their homes, because around the turn of the 20th century, a tiny bit earlier, vibrators began not only to be a medical item that only a doctor could get, but also a consumer item. This vibrator, the Detwiller, may very well have been a doctor's office item though, because if you look at the back panel of its box, you see that it runs on compressed air or gas. It was not an electric motor. It was a mechanized compressed air motor, the kind that they use to flatten the sidewalk out when they're doing construction. So a very powerful little item right there. And I doubt, although I don't know for a fact, that people had these by their bedside tables at home. But the electrical ones, yes, they did. Or in whatever part of the house they would use to treat their own hysteria symptoms. And here are just a few slightly later vibrators. The one at the bottom is a really beautiful vibrator in a nice case. This was a version of something that a doctor might have had or might have gone into the home. And you can see a little oil can there with everything else. These were mechanical items over 100 years ago, and they had to be oiled in order to function properly. So we are standing near the 1920s vibrators. There were ads for these vibrators in the early part of the 20th century. They didn't say a thing about sex. These are not intended to be used for what people then would have thought of as sexual purposes. No vaginal penetration involved with this, all clitoral stimulation. And they were very, very widely advertised and thought of as a health product rather than a sexual product. However, in the 1920s, we began to see vibrators showing up in blue movies, stag films, pornos, and that let the cat out of the bag of the social camouflage that had existed on this item, which meant that the vibrator suddenly was known more extensively as a sexual item. People realized this hysterical paroxysm was an orgasm, and the ads disappeared. But the vibrators did not go away. These are from the 30s. The vibrators, if anything, got more multitudinous, more different designs, beautiful designs, all very Art Deco in some cases. And in the 1940s, which are the next two cases, they continued to develop in their look. They got smaller and easier, more portable. So the final stand of the vibrator, before it became an acknowledged sex implement and sex toy, was to be used for health and beauty. There were even some that claimed that they could help you lose weight. I don't think that was really, in fact, true. And they were available throughout the 20th century.